Have you ever wanted to create a fantasy world, write novels, draw comics, maybe even make a tabletop RPG? Well, that's what Ben and I wanted to do ever since we grew up, and we started to do it professionally just a few years ago. And so we decided to put together this podcast where we'll actually just get together and hang out as buddies and talk about what our experiences have been. We're going to be not super structured on the podcast. This is our first time like really doing a podcast, but we figured it would be fun to get together and just go through the tips, tricks, and experiences we've had, tell some stories, and go for it.
So welcome to the Wizards of Eem, this first inaugural episode.
Where we stretch our legs and, try it out. We're gonna see how it goes.
So, like we said, we're lifelong friends. We've been friends since second grade, and we've been creative partners since second grade because we made epic comics, Spider-Man comics. We made them with crayons, construction paper.
One of our best comics, crafted in the classroom of the great Mrs. Suhu. It was the epic tale of Shaquille O'Neal teaming up with Spider-Man to save the city of New York. And so we have that comic somewhere.
We've been doing this for a long time.
Let's first validate that we've been doing this for a long time, and we consider our first ever collaboration taking place in the second grade.
But we're also authors by trade now. We made Rickety Stitch and the Gelatinous Goo, which is a fantasy graphic novel put out by Random House, and now it's going to be published by Exalted Funeral soon.
Excited about that.
We're also the authors of Dungeoneer Adventures, a middle grade series, 3-book series that we just finished up in 2024 about a kid who goes to a school for adventures in the Land of Eem. And the Land of Eem is our fantasy world that we created. And we've been working on it for, over 20 years now. And so we kind of wanted to go through about 6 key things that we think will really help you get started on creating a fantasy world for yourself.
Yeah, it's basically like it's not the only things we focus on, but they're like the top ones that we think about day to day when we're working on projects.
And we're not even talking about you need 30 factions and you need your mountains to be here and you can't have your rivers going this way, because we're not talking about any of that stuff. We're talking about really high level strategies for just working and getting words onto a piece of paper.
Yeah, because that's what we're about. We're about putting the words on the pieces of paper.
Well, this is a good segue into our first one, because the first tip is that lore matters, but not as much as you think.
Yeah.
So people can easily get bogged down in world building. They've got their copious binders and Word docs just filled with notes on their world.
Now, which is super fun to do. Let me first say that caveat. World building and going overboard on the lore is a fun activity. So totally enjoy it and do it. But if you're looking to create a world that's done and playable in a game or usable as a setting for a novel, getting too bogged down in the lore can really stop your characters from emerging, or the action from emerging, or that kind of draw in that makes the world feel alive.
You can also just get lost in just the history of the world. And James was saying, you don't have any actual characters that anyone will care about. So what you want to do is kind of think about what's going on in the present time of your world or your story that you're beginning with. And you kind of want to start small. And that's our next key. Start with a story, not like a grand, fully fleshed out world. You don't have to have everything figured out at the beginning. And once that initial story takes place, you kind of world build out from it. And that's kind of exactly what we did with Land of Eem. We started with Rickety Stitch and his plight. And then,
And for those of you that aren't familiar with Rickety Stitch, it's a 3-book series about a skeleton bard who goes on an epic quest to find out who he was when he was alive. And the very beginning of the story, Rickety, the skeleton, is essentially the victim of amnesia. He has no idea about his past or where he's from. And the whole concept behind it is that he's this anonymous being that has to then go forth and discover what is out there and who he is. And that was our tool for, beginning to build a world that may not have all the answers at the beginning. Like there's a lot of mystery to the Land of Eem. There still is, even though it's so big now. But that caveat, that like tool, allowed us to get the story going so that we would feel invested in the character and the character's journey and the character's struggles and the conflicts that character has, both internally and externally. And then all of these different elements started to emerge around Rickety to the point where, Ben and I are like, there's a lot to be going on in this world. Like, what if, this, that, or the other? And so
it works the same way in an RPG campaign.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
if you spend all your time like preparing this giant world, it might be a waste of time, because you can start out with a small town and have the players start there. And then as they start exploring and want to go different places, you can also build along with that gradually. Just kind of like build it out from the center, so to speak.
Right. The Mucklin sandbox is the perfect example for that, because in the Rickety Stitch story, the Mucklin sandbox is like this much. It's like and I'm holding up my fingers here. Like it's an inch big in the story, and he goes directly to this other region, which we haven't even fleshed out in the game yet. And then when we went back to work on the tabletop game, we're like, gosh, like there was all this like ideas that we had associated to where he started his journey. And we ended up just creating an entire sandbox campaign setting specifically for that region to kind of pay off a lot of the jokes or a lot of the innuendo or a lot of the suggestions that existed in Rickety Stitch, but were never fully explored because that wasn't the story. The story is about for his past. And that's something that is actually coming to play right now as we come to as we recently came to a conclusion with Dungeoneer Adventures. It was a similar thing. Dungeoneer Adventures takes place in the Underlands. They have adventures in the fungal jungle. And that led to what we announced not too long ago, which is the expansion to the Land of Eem game that includes the Underlands, where the Dungeoneer Adventures stories take place.
Right, and we really did not like define anything in the Underlands until we started writing Dungeoneer Adventures, and then we just like for the Underlands campaign setting, like we're really digging deep into it.
But writing stories that are character focused with character conflicts and then putting it into a setting
that's our third key. Start with compelling characters. So third key is starting with compelling characters.
Yeah,
so we've got Rickety
We're running
Stitch,
episode 1 like a random dungeon.
The amnesiac skeleton who wakes up after being resurrected by a lich. But among the legion of skeletons, he's the only one with a personality. I mean, that's pretty compelling, and like it really sparked our imaginations and led us down this path where we were asking questions like, okay, who is the necromancer who's raising Rickety Stitch and all these other skeletons? Why is Rickety Stitch the only one? What's funny is we haven't even answered that officially. Like, we know the answer, but we haven't answered that officially.
Tune in to the Wizards of Eem podcast, episode 490.
Yeah, we still have big plans for Rickety Stitch and want to have that come out actually in a story. So we're not going to like spoil it here. We've been working on Rickety Stitch for over 20 years.
That's 2
It started small, okay? Started really small. And so we've got the compelling characters, okay? And in an RPG, like your players are only going to care about the NPCs. They're not going to care about all the lore right off the bat. They're going to care about saving the people that they've met and people in their backstory and like, all that stuff. You really want to ground the story in the characters. And in the Mucklin sandbox and all the future sandboxes that we do, like our sandboxes are really character focused. We have 450 NPCs.
I was about to say 4x that, and then you're close.
And so when you look at the book, you'll like what you see right off the bat is like every character is illustrated, and that's really just emblematic of how we approach stories.
Yeah, right. And when we say like a compelling character, some things that make characters compelling are the conflicts that the characters have. Obviously, there's their perks and their quirks and like the things that make up who that character is, but the trouble that they're in or the problem that they need to solve a lot of times those elements are what is going to draw a player character into wanting to know more about the lore, because often those characters are somehow mingling with lore that's taking place in that location or that region, or there's layers that can be pulled back to make the characters, or I'm sorry, make the player characters, specifically like the players themselves, be much more interested in what's going on in that region if it's affecting someone that they're invested in. And that's what leads us to our fourth key, which is throw rocks at your characters and generate conflicts.
Yeah. And that can even be applied to not even the main characters, but just like everyone involved in your world, like the factions, they should be at odds with each other. Every character in an RPG, for example, all the NPCs should want something, and something should be in the way of what they want. So the player characters, have a purpose and can help them and do all that. In a story, it's super important for your main character to have a motivation and then have antagonists throw rocks at them. And this literally happens in Rickety Stitch. He's pelted with rocks
creative
outside
gag.
of all these waffles and boards.
Yeah. That's what a GM's job is too. Obviously, you're the player's biggest fan, number one, because that's what makes games fun, when the players get to do the things that compel them and they get to be heroic, especially Land of Eem, I should say. But throwing rocks at your characters, creating those challenges, is what sparks the creativity in the players themselves. And it's what sparks the action and creates those heroic moments or those hilarious moments that make gameplay so fun. Ben and I intend to talk about different RPG moments that we've carried with us that we still talk about throughout the years later in later episodes of the podcast. But it's like the GM in many ways is the assistant author to the story of the game. They are presenting all kinds of challenges to the players, and those players and operating the same way an author does when you're throwing rocks at the characters that are on the page. So there's this nice dichotomy, which is why for me, working on the tabletop game is so fun, because in many ways it's like this long, stretchy collaboration with other creators that are creating stories in this world that Ben and I have worked so hard on that are fun and compelling, and people will carry with them.
Yeah. I mean, lately, some of the greatest joy I have is reading people's accounts of their games on our Discord.
Same on the Discord. Yeah. Oh gosh, I love that. Or folks playing with their kids or their different groups. I mean, just from last week when we were doing our own game, and we rolled the encounter of the dragon that like a world, like a city destroying dragon, and now we've got to talk our way out of that situation next episode. But that's it's like you can engineer those moments. You can use different tools to create those moments, which make role playing and storytelling just super fun for the people participating.
Right. So we don't have a great segue into the next point, but I think it's a pretty good point that you should always put your own spin on things. So when you're generating ideas, when you're writing, look, there's nothing new under the sun, really. Every story's been done, but
bold talk.
I mean, it's true, but
no, I know. I agree with you.
The thing that separates authors from each other is the way they tell the stories, and so it's the execution, not.
No, it's I follow you. It's it's a combination of the execution, the hook, the perspective. One great example that I totally recommend to everybody is I'm a huge fan of Beowulf. Of multiple translations of Beowulf. I think it's a great story. And if you check it out, there's a bunch of different translations and they all can offer something else. But there's also, is it David Gardner wrote Grendel? Is that his name? David Gardner. I think so.
Gardner.
I don't think it's David. Something Gardner. Ben will look it up while I'm talking. John Gardner. That's right. John Gardner. Sorry. John Gardner wrote Grendel. And it's the story of Beowulf from the perspective of Grendel. And it is a really refreshing, deep character study and just very compelling story that gives you this flip side of the same tale. And though that doesn't exactly translate to tabletop games or Land of Eem or creating your own world, it's a good example of how you can put a different spin on things to make something fresh or to have a different perspective. And that's not to say you're not inspired by stuff. Obviously Ben and I are inspired by The Lord of the Rings.
It's obviously. It's exactly. I was going to say it's things can become new and fresh in certain combinations. So like Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets. That's like a fresh combination for us. So if you have a fantasy setting with, elves and, all the Lord of the Rings stuff, that's awesome. But try to think of why are dwarves a little bit different than Tolkien's. And
what are
elves,
your dwarves like? What are, and in some cases there may be plenty of it's kind of like this because that's what you like, and that's fine too. It's just, it's a way that you can approach it to have players be surprised or amazed or
one simple way that we do this in our game and in our world is we'll take, a kobold, which if you ask people who play 5e, they say is like a lizard creature, but ours is a little radish magical thing, which I've never seen that. It's like more in tune with the old fairy stories,
like old folklore, or how we did spins on boggarts and boggles and some of the older nomenclature for goblin folk and fairy folk, and then doing a modern quasi a legitimately modern industrial spin on some of how they operate with each other. It's a little bit Labyrinth meets The Office in some regards.
And we're not saying reinvent the wheel. We're just saying spin it a little bit.
Yeah, spin the wheel a little. You know what I mean?
To go along with that, our last key thing is to have fun with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't get all a bunch. I don't know what to say here.
It's kind of, I'm leaving it just so you know. No, so I was saying at the when we first started our discussion that sometimes deep diving on lore is super fun. Do it. It can be super fun, and then you can unwrap that onion and discover characters that fall into place that can have an impact on your world or impact with players or readers or whatever your creative project that you're approaching in a fantasy world. But the key is to have fun with it. If Ben and I were not having fun, there's no way we would be making project after project for years together since we were in second grade.
Yeah. And if we weren't even professional authors, we'd still be doing stuff like this. We'd still be, writing stories and, playing RPGs and making our own worlds and stuff. So definitely just keep doing, if doing all the lore and the history is fun for you and you're productive that way, do it.
Yeah. And it can be fun to read too. I mean, I think about thumbed through my Lord of the Rings encyclopedia, and I've definitely in an airport read the Encyclopedia of Arda app on my phone. Just have fun. Chase what you like. That's what we always do. Whenever we do school visits and stuff, where I was just make what you like. Make whatever it is you like. If you like mysteries, make mysteries. If you like thrillers, make thrillers. Ben and I dual tone fantasy adventures that mix cartoonish hijinks with a little bit of peril and
we do.
Oh yeah, we have fun here at the Land of Eem. You know what I mean? At the Wizards of Eem podcast, it's just two wizards casting over and over again. Rolling 20s, rolling 12s.
So that's a taste of how we, two lifelong friends, have built a fantasy world over the last 20 years. We use these techniques and strategies. This is how we approach it. You don't need 20 years to do this. You just need a little time every day to write, to think about these stories and these games, and you'll be off to the races.
For a second, I thought you were going to slip into a Jeff Goldblum impression on the first ever episode of Wizards of Eem podcast, but we'll save that for later, along with many other things. Like we said, this is just our casual get together to talk about what it is we're doing and how we do it, to share a little bit behind the scenes of being authors and game designers. And if you like it, if you want to follow along, definitely subscribe and share the podcast with folks. Or if you want to see us play the game, you can check the actual play. Or if you are a fan of Eem or want to play Land of Eem, you can visit the website landofelem.com, and you can download the quick start guide, and you can check out our Discord. There's always folks getting together to talk Land of Eem and make games.
You can buy the game from Exalted Funeral. It's out, and the book is $40. The whole deluxe set is $150, and we're really excited about the release.
Yeah, which is imminent. So anybody listening to this into the future, we have been working on this game for years, and it is imminently going to be released. So we hope everybody enjoys it. And thanks again for stepping into the Wizards of Eem podcast, and we'll see you guys soon.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.